Okay, fantastic. Well, it is 3 o'clock and that's our start time for our webinars, and I appreciate everyone joining. We are in our 7th in a series of webinars for small business navigating the impacts of COVID-19. I'm Barbara Coffey, Director of Economic Initiatives for the City of Tucson. And we'll spend the first half of our time together today hearing from our guest speakers, and then we'll have some time for Q&A with all of you to round out the hour. We can certainly take questions as we go, so please feel free to enter those in the chat box and or the Q&A area, and we will get to as many of those as possible in our time together this afternoon. And we'll have you all muted. All participants will stay muted since we do have a large number of attendees, and I see that number is growing even now. You can find links to all of our previous webinars at connecttucson.com, and we will record this session and have it available for everyone tomorrow or for you to share with others. And we typically will post those by noon tomorrow. So sometime tomorrow afternoon, feel free to take a look at connecttucson.com. You'll find the webinar also listed there, in addition to all those that have gone before. So I'm very excited. We have a great lineup today, and I think you're going to hear some good information. Some of it may be more sobering, and some of it certainly may be more inspiring. But then again, isn't that the way the last few weeks have gone? So today, we have University of Arizona's Dr. George Hammond, Director of the Economic and Business Research Center in the Eller College of Management. Dr. Hammond has decades of experience analyzing and forecasting state and local economies. He reaches more than 1,000 decision makers each year through conferences, publications, press contacts, and formats like NBC Nightly News, the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, Bloomberg Business Week, the New York Times, and of course our local media. So today he is going to share an economic update with us as we find ourselves on the brink of trying to reopen this economy. Dr. Hammond, if you would just share with us a picture of the economy right now, and then maybe a little bit about what we can expect to see over the next several months. I know that you may have some slides and things, so I'll turn it over to you, and feel free to share your screen.
Okay, thanks, Barbara, and great to see everyone here today. I'm gonna share my screen for you now. That should do it. Can you see my first slide?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about what we're gonna do in the next 15 minutes or so. And the first thing that we're gonna talk about, and the first thing to remember, is that there's a huge amount of uncertainty about the outlook right now. And what's driving that uncertainty is our uncertainty about the progress of the outbreak in coming weeks and months. And that uncertainty about the outbreak is driving uncertainty about the economic outlook. We know we're headed for a major downturn. It's really uncertainty about the recovery, when it will begin and how strong it will be is very uncertain, because we don't know for sure when we'll have control over the outbreak, and thus we don't know when people are going to feel comfortable enough to begin going out and resuming their normal lives. What we do know is that the Arizona economy was strong before the outbreak began. Arizona added about 80,000 new jobs last year. It's really strong growth. Tucson also generated very strong job growth last year. So the state economy fundamentally is really strong. And that is good news as we think about the recovery once it finally begins. Now, we also know that the Arizona economy is in the midst of a severe, a severe downturn. We're going to see huge job losses across all sectors. Now, initially, travel and tourism are going to be hit hard, but we also know that retail trade, healthcare, some personal services sectors like hair salons, also going to be hit very hard. But this is going to ripple across all sectors of the state and local economies. With this kind of really unusual downturn that's synchronized both across all geographies, almost globally, and it's also synchronized across sectors. So there's going to be very few very few places that aren't affected. Good news is there is some pretty strong federal monetary and fiscal relief, and that will help, but it won't eliminate the downturn. It will only serve to cushion the downturn that we're going to go through. Now, you want to keep in mind that Arizona was strong before the outbreak began, and that means that we're well positioned once we start to grow again to again be one of the strongest growing states in the nation. But all of this is going to be driven by when the outbreak is contained, and most importantly, when people feel like the outbreak is contained enough that they can go back and safely resume more normal economic activities, whatever that eventually looks like. So let's talk a little bit about the past. And this graph shows you job growth for Arizona, Phoenix, and Tucson. And last year, Arizona added 80,000 jobs for 2.8% growth. That was double the national rate of growth. Phoenix grew even faster. Tucson also beat the national growth rate at 1.9%, faster than the US at 1.4%. Tucson added about 7,000 jobs last year, and that was our fastest growth rate in more than a decade, the fastest we had grown and added jobs since about 2006. Now, a great way to get a little broader view of the Tucson economy is to actually check out the map dashboard. And we have an economy scorecard there that kind of takes you through the 6 indicators that we use to summarize overall economic performance in Tucson. And those range from business growth to employment growth, housing affordability, median household income, patents, and real GDP. The second column there shows the latest observation for each indicator. The third column over shows you an icon-based ranking system. If you see a sun, Tucson ranks in the top third among the 12 Western metros that we track. Partly sunny icon, Tucson's in the middle of the distribution. A cloudy icon, Tucson's in the bottom third. And a thunderstorm icon, Tucson ranks last out of the 12 Western metros. And you can see that there are a couple of bright spots in Tucson. Our housing affordability, and this is single family housing affordability, is relatively good. We actually rank in the top third. Housing is relative to income is much more competitive, much cheaper here than it is in many Western metro areas, and that helps us attract migrants from around the West. We also do relatively well in terms of patent activity, and that's good because that's an indicator of innovative activity locally, and that's what really drives our long-run standard of living. Now, we have a couple of partly sunny icons for real GDP, so that was actually relatively good. Employment growth last year was pretty good, relatively fast. But you'll notice that we rank in the bottom in terms of median household income and business growth. So there are some bright spots in the Tucson economy, but certainly plenty of room for improvement. So that's where we were. Let's talk about where we are now. And where we are now is in the midst of this really, at least for our working lives, this is unprecedented. The outbreak is present in Arizona. Most of the coronavirus cases are in Maricopa County. Pima County ranks second in the state for the number of cases. Now, with the impact of social distancing, both the government-imposed social distancing and the social distancing that people would be doing and were doing even before the shutdowns were announced, this has created a huge shock to the local, national economies. So this gives you a sense of the scale of what's happened. And what we're tracking on this particular slide is initial claims for unemployment insurance. Now, these are initial claims. These are not people, the people who are making these claims are not necessarily qualified to receive benefits, even under the expanded definition. So these don't translate directly into jobs lost, but the vast majority of these claims do correspond to jobs lost, just not quite all of them. Well, you notice starting with the weekend of March 21st, we had 29,000 claims. That was up from about 4,000 claims the week before, which was a pretty normal number pre-outbreak. March 28th, they more than double. We get up to 132,000 for the week ended April 4th. and then they've gradually come down in the succeeding weeks. But during the past 6 weeks, Arizona has registered just over 470,000 initial claims for unemployment insurance. So that is a huge number of claims, most of which correspond to job losses. So we're seeing the same thing happen nationally. Nationally, there have been over 30 million initial claims for unemployment insurance. So, you know, this is the kind of shock that we haven't seen in at least 100 years. It's different from the previous recessions that we've been through, like the big downturn of 2008, 2009. That happened much more slowly. It was much less synchronized across sectors and much less synchronized, much less similar across regions of the country and regions of the globe. This is happening at the same time globally, nationally, and across sectors. And that makes it really different. So let's talk about what we're thinking in terms of the outlook for the state. Well, we're looking at in 2020 huge job income and sales declines, and that's under baseline or most likely assumptions. So these declines are going to be worse than what we experienced peak to trough during the 2008-2009 downturn. I think the job losses from peak to trough, so these are the maximal job losses that we'll see, will be around 15% of state jobs gone between the fourth quarter of 2019 and the second or third quarters of 2020. Translates into about 480,000 jobs statewide. That translates into an unemployment rate that's well above the peak during the 2008-2009 downturn. This current projection calls for the unemployment rate to rise to somewhere in the neighborhood of 15% in the second quarter and increase a little bit more up into the neighborhood of 19 or 20% by the end of the year. So a very significant shock. Overall population growth is going to slow, particularly over the summer months, but thereafter it does begin to grow again. That means we will see a bit of an impact on the housing and construction sectors. But I don't think that the downturn that we're going to see in housing and construction during this downturn will be of the same order of magnitude that we saw during the 2008-2009 downturn. This one is very different. Now, Arizona was in really strong shape before the downturn began, and that's good news as we think about the recovery. Now, once the outbreak is under control and once people feel like they can go back and resume something fairly similar to their normal lives, we're going to see the economy begin to grow, and those initial growth rates are going to be really rapid. But it's going to take us time to get back to the level we were at before the outbreak began. So that late 2019 level of economic activity. It's probably going to be late 2022 before we get back to that level, even though we're going to be generating very strong growth rates. This is connected to the depth of the downturn that we're about to go through. So that's a little quick summary, a sketch of the baseline scenario, and that's a most likely scenario. That's assigned a probability of 45%. The pessimistic scenario is assigned almost as high a probability at 35%, and that assumes a much more severe downturn that takes us much longer to recover from. So let's talk about the federal policy responses. Overall monetary policy has been really aggressive and really aggressive early on. Interest rates are expected to be near zero for the foreseeable future. The Federal Reserve, our monetary authority, has resurrected some lending facilities that were created during the 2008-2009 downturn. They've also created other lending facilities to provide liquidity to various markets. We're also expecting an aggressive return to quantitative easing. So the Federal Reserve is working very hard, in particular in their role as a lender of last resort. Fiscal policy has also been fairly aggressive so far. The CARES Act, the latest federal fiscal policy, is scored by the Office of Management and Budget at $2.3 trillion. And that includes a variety of supports, direct payments to individuals and families, much of which has started to go out or is already out. We've greatly expanded unemployment insurance, both the weekly benefits that are available, which have been increased by $600. So Arizona's maximum benefit was $240 per week. That's been increased by $600 per week to $840. That will be in effect through the end of July. The CARES Act also expands the period under which individuals can claim unemployment insurance benefits by 13 weeks up to a total of 39. And they've also expanded the eligibility for unemployment insurance to include the self-employed and contract employees, what we now call gig workers. There's also a significant amount of support which has been expanded recently through the Small Business Administration, the Paycheck Protection Program, which I think you guys have discussed in these webinars previously, and other support through the SBA. So that has got additional funding. And there's other support available as well, both through restructuring of the tax code and individual support, for instance, to student loan borrowers. The key for this kind of support, particularly the fiscal policy, is that it happens rapidly. There are big questions on whether it's both big enough and rapid enough at this point to really help us. It's likely that more fiscal policy support will be needed going forward. So where can you get more information? Two good places to get it are at the Making Action Possible dashboard at mapaz-dashboard.arizona.edu and at the Arizona's Economy online magazine at azeconomy.org. And with that, I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll turn things back over to Barbara.
Okay. Great, thank you. And there are a couple questions coming through. I know one of them, Dr. Hammond, was about your slides and whether you could make those available. I'm happy to forward those on, or certainly our recorded webinar is a place you can view them again. So I know that will be, that will be available option.
Sure, I'll send them to you in a PDF format, Barbara.
Okay, fantastic. And you brought up a few things about this reopening and whether, and how I like to say it is, whether consumers will feel comfortable. Are they concerned about their safety and health? How does this period of reopening look? Will there be a flood of activity, or will it trickle in over time? What's your best guess on how that looks?
That's one of the key points of uncertainty. And one of the things that we've done in my center is on the azeconomy.org website is we're tracking some kind of key indicators of social distancing. And these are kind of different from our standard things. We usually track jobs and sales tax revenues and income, but we're tracking on a weekly basis US movie ticket sales. We're also tracking TSA checkpoint passengers, so the number of people who are traveling through TSA checkpoints. We're tracking hotel occupancy rates. We're just getting ready to put up measures of restaurant reservations through Open Table that will help us track how people are getting back to more normal activities, going to restaurants, going back to movies, traveling, staying in hotels. So that's something I think we will see a pretty rapid bounce back initially, but I think it will take a couple of years for us to get back to more normal employment levels. And in some cases, things may be enough different that it'll be years before we see the number of jobs at restaurants and bars, arts, entertainment, recreation get back to where they were pre-outbreak.
But you feel pretty good you can benchmark some of that data with the sources. So as you're looking at movie tickets and Open Table reservations, you can benchmark that against what it was?
Yes, we have it both pre-outbreak and then the outbreak going forward. So we'll be able to tell how we're doing in terms of getting back to normal.
Mm-hmm. No, that's good. And I know, and we'll talk a little more as we move forward in today's discussion about how some of the small businesses are going to be facing that reopening process and what they may have to do. But I know it's on everyone's mind. There's a question here, though, for you about whether you have a forecast for the technology sector during the recovery. What do you see with our industries in the tech sector?
Yes, some of the tech sector will do really well. I think that, part of what we'll see is that the changes, for instance, competitive pressures between brick and mortar retailers and online retailers, some of that will kind of hit the fast forward button, and we'll see a faster transition to online now that people are getting more experience with having their groceries delivered, ordering more things online. So some of that will proceed much faster, but I think we'll always have brick and mortar retailers. People are still going to want that. The tech sector is going to continue to be a fairly rapidly growing sector. That's a sector that doesn't require people to gather together in order to either work or to take advantage of those services. So it's a sector that I think will rebound fairly rapidly.
And I think where the university is concerned, I mean, you could maybe allay some fears given you mentioned innovation and how important that is in terms of how our sort of long-term sustainability and the picture of that with industrial growth. So if, tell us what's happening in terms of the university. Certainly research is still going on.
Yes, the campus is closed, but the university is still open. The students are actually finishing up their classes online. The summer semesters will be online. The university expects to have students back on campus in the fall. That will be good for local retailers and restaurateurs. The university is still going full bore. This is a major shock to universities nationwide. Those that are not really thinking hard about how to deal with this, or those that haven't really woken up yet. So the U of A is really on the cutting edge of this, unfortunately, but that just means we're going to hit all the innovations sooner than most universities. And I think it will be tough for a while, but we're going to come out much more competitive going forward.
I appreciate that. And then thank you for that update. I know it's on the minds of a lot of our businesses that are connected very closely to the activity that the U of A is. It is certainly a major economic impact in our community. And I know that those are customers, right, of these businesses that have been so heavily impacted. So while we shift gears, one of the things that I've seen in the chat room and the Q&A is about the question about sole proprietors and whether they've had access to COVID-19 federal funds or if they are still eligible for programs like the EIDL or the PPP. And I know with our direct loan program that we are making those loans available to applicants who are sole proprietors or 1099 contractors. And so for our program administered by Business Development Finance Corp, you can go to the website at bdfc.com, and I'll put that later in the chat box. But I know also that Ellen Curtin I see her on our list of attendees again, quite an expert with our SBDC programs, and certainly has championed the work of many of those who have been applying for those funds. Maybe Ellen, you could put something in the chat box as well for folks to if you have updates on the federal programs that might still be available. So with that, I will transition us to talk with Kimber Lanning. And I want to introduce Kimber. She is founder of Local First Arizona and Local First Arizona Foundation, two distinct statewide organizations working in tandem to strengthen Arizona's economy. She is an entrepreneur, business leader, and community development specialist who works to cultivate strong, self-reliant communities and inspire a higher quality of life for people across the state. Local First Arizona now has nearly 3,000 business members and 4 statewide offices, including representation right here in our area in Southern Arizona. And that's why Mike Peel is also on our webinar today. So we'll start with Kimber. I know you have some slides to share as well, so go ahead and tee those up. I'm looking forward to hearing your stories about how you've assisted our small businesses during the past several weeks and hearing some of these creative ways that the local business community has responded. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Barbara. Thanks very much. And we can go right into that next slide, Mike. So, as we've heard just a little bit about, we sort of jumped into action early on in this when we realized that a lot of our smallest businesses that really make up a lot of Arizona's economy were not included in the first round of PPP funding. And we'll talk more a little bit about the corrections that were made. But what we decided to do initially is, first of all, to recognize the smallest, most vulnerable businesses, which are under 3 employees, the critical role that they play, and then opened up a portal to receive donations and sponsorships so that we could begin managing micro grants ourselves. We can go to the next slide. So with the micro grant, the concept is that people were able to apply online, and we were focused on 3 and fewer employees and only those up to 250,000 in gross sales. And we prioritized family-owned businesses with no other source of revenue that had been shut down. And so next slide, Mike. So to give you a sense of who that is, I think a lot of times people, they're not quite sure, well, gosh, these are tiny businesses. What kind of businesses do you mean? And so this kind of gives you an overview. We have heard from all types of businesses that we all interact with every day. I remind people this is like the solo person that cuts your hair that was maybe a 1099 employee but owned their own business, sort of an independent entrepreneur that wasn't able to qualify for the federal funding in the first round. We heard a lot from artists and musicians and others who are independent entrepreneurs, or maybe they have 1 or 2 employees and operate by submitting a 1099. They contract with different entities. We surprisingly heard from a good number of people that contract with school districts, things like photographers or after-school yoga instructors and folks like that, that were not only had all of their work cancel on them, they were actually carrying a lot of accounts receivables from the schools who were dealing with a whole other crisis with getting their kids safely transitioned to home. So we really were able to jump in and make a huge difference here. In the next slide, Mike, this will give you a sense of who applied, the different types of businesses. We have been able to raise about $825,000, and we've distributed about $700,000 to date in $2,500 increments. So it was a heavy lift. We had about 1,600 businesses apply through our website, and we moved as quickly as possible to move through those, understanding that everyone in our communities needs help right now, and awarding as many as we possibly could across the state. And so the other thing that I wanted to highlight, and Mike, you can go to the next one, is looking at the work that we're doing with one-on-one consulting. We are offering, schedule a consult with somebody on our team, and we've been able to leverage a lot of pro bono resources on behalf of our small business community. So the Arizona Society of CPAs stood up and they gave us about a dozen recently or somewhat retired accountants who have dedicated their time to help our small businesses navigate the federal funding. The other thing I do want to name is that a lot of the groups that I'm talking about right now, Barbara, round 2 of the PPP did include them. There were still some challenges in some of the banks were still asking in their online portals, they were asking for forms that a solo entrepreneur wouldn't have. And then, of course, the entrepreneur wasn't able to get through to anybody to answer those questions, and therefore their applications got rejected. So I do want to say, though, that with round 2, the state of Arizona has really turned it around. For those of you who don't know, in round 1, we were in the bottom 5 in terms of dollars flowing into our small businesses here in Arizona. In round 2, we are already in the top 10. And we still have money to go. And so I would encourage, even if you are a solo entrepreneur on the line, if you were rejected in the past, go ahead and reach out to one of those online portals and apply again, because the rules really did change, and we want to try to get as many of you funded as possible. The one-on-one consulting that we're offering in the webinars will help you navigate that, whether it's filling out the forms, any sort of legal challenges. We're hearing from a number of small businesses that are facing challenges from their landlords. You know, a lot of our small businesses spent their life savings staying afloat in March and April, and now the faucet is dry in May. And so our goal is to try to help folks navigate that so they can negotiate a deal with a landlord to stay in their place and maybe not have a balloon payment in July, which doesn't do us any good whatsoever in Arizona, but rather pay that back over maybe even as much as a year. It's definitely in the landlord's best interest to keep our businesses in place, because we don't want empty spaces. They're going to sit empty for a long time. So how can we play a role with the small business, helping them manage their debt, helping them put a payment plan together, helping them with other strategies to remain in their place and get access to the resources they need. Okay, Mike. So what's next at Local First Arizona is we are developing new curriculum around taking not only our small business community, but also I think in this crisis, we've been able to really see how important these small businesses are, right? If we think about them in aggregate, as we explained just a moment ago, if we have over 300 businesses apply on one day representing 555 jobs, that tells you how important that is to Arizona's economy. If I came to leadership and said, every day for 3 weeks straight, we had a company with 500 plus employees call and tell us they're closing down, everybody would be running around like their hair's on fire. But because it's a million points of light and all of the small businesses is having this struggle, I think it took a crisis for us to elevate the importance, their important place in Arizona's overall economy. So in building that bridge going forward of how do we educate the small businesses, but looking across the state, how do we bring in city and town managers and others to think about how we're going to build long-term resiliency. And sorry, this slide looks a little wonky on my end. I don't know if it does on yours, but the 3 phases that we're working through are triage, recovery, and resiliency. We're clearly in triage right now. We are trying to save as many of Arizona's small businesses as we possibly can. And we're helping to transition them into recovery. And that looks like helping them understand how we're going to rebuild the trust of the consumer. It's a COVID clean training that needs to occur so that our small businesses can send a very clear message about how they're being safe and how the consumer can be comfortable coming back in. And in that recovery phase, it's going to be restructuring debt, helping them figure out payment plans, rehiring plans, even navigating the repayment of the PPP loan so that it becomes a forgivable loan. That's going to be a big part of our work over the next several months. And then moving into resiliency, I think it's really important that we don't say to ourselves, we just need to rebuild it, because we actually need to build it slightly differently in a lot of ways to make sure that it is more resilient from an economic perspective and an environmental perspective. From an economic perspective, there are a lot of systems that are broken. Our food system, whether we want to talk about our small producers not earning a living wage, or the huge number of community members that don't have access to healthy food. There's an opportunity there for us to really grow jobs and opportunities in food processing, packaging, distribution, as well as actually production. There are a number of different systems. I will identify the fact that our financial system here in Arizona also needs to be more resilient. We just got a firsthand glimpse of how dangerous it can be when we have too much money deposited in too few banks. When we in Arizona, we normally in good times have just shy of $70 billion of our money deposited in 3 very big banks who made a choice to do business in Arizona only with their existing clients, and those skewed to be very big companies. Arizona is a small business state, and we need to have our community banks and credit unions in partnership and at the table, because they're the ones who stepped up and really helped our small business sector. So as we look at resiliency, we're going to be looking at partnering with businesses across the state of Arizona to make city and town, county, and statewide recommendations about how we can rebuild it in a more resilient fashion. So I just have a couple quick slides here before I'm going to hand it over to Mike. There's one more here. So again, as we start thinking about the curriculum that we're going to be developing, we're going to be looking at a small business track that looks at actual tactics and skills for negotiating with landlords, suppliers, lenders, not getting overwhelmed, but rather putting a step-by-step repayment plan in place. And reopening the business, as I mentioned, marketing, staffing, debt management, and then that resiliency. I think we're going to see all types of new collaborations coming out of this. We might see 2 businesses join together to rent one space or one subletting from another. We may look at all kinds of different thoughts and strategies to build more equity into our communities, more accessibility. And certainly we're going to see new technology play a key role in how our small businesses can remain competitive during the next phase of what we will know is our reality, which is coming at us. And like we just heard from George, we're not quite sure what that looks like yet, but we want to make sure that our small businesses are prepared. So I'm going to hand it over to Mike now to give some great examples of what some of the small businesses in Tucson are doing right now, and then some additional resources and some of the programs that we offer at Local First.
Thank you, Kimber. What I'm going to be now talking about is really the proof of how strong Tucson is, the strength of our local business community to move swiftly, as fast as possible, out of from recovery, which is already a big accomplishment, into resiliency. So I'm going to go over 4 examples of business pivots that I think can be good examples to consider for other businesses as well. So one is PopCycle. I knew that the shop is temporarily closed for the safety of the staff and the community. However, online orders are available. Curbside pickup and doorstep delivery is available with $25 minimum purchase on. Free shipping is available for orders over $100. And then they're getting very creative with organizing special art auctions and auctioning off one special piece of art on weekend days throughout this month on all their social media channels. And these are unique artworks that are going to support local artists. So there's a lot of collaboration already going on, and building off the strength of the business model as it already stands. The next example is Mostly Books. They closed on March 18th and continue to provide orders online through delivery and curbside pickup as well. They've also offered a quarantine book lover surprise where customers can purchase these pre-packed bags of books based on descriptions on the bag. And then there's another option for staff to pick surprise titles for customers based on the genres that they love, how many books they're looking for, and how much they want to spend. The third example is why I love where I live. Owner Kristen Tovar prepared for a big grand opening for the larger shop that they have now at the MSA Annex. That was planned March 21st, and obviously changes in plans for events occurred everywhere. So she adjusted the plan quickly and was able to still have a grand opening virtually. So the shop got set up for 3D imaging, and the website was rebuilt to be better suited for e-commerce. And that happened on March 21st still with this virtual tour of the new shop, a 3D virtual tour, complete with a welcome video, interactive elements, a micro art gallery, surprise giveaways throughout, and an Instagram live for Q&A throughout. So until the being able to physically open again as of now, Tovar is also offering free shipping. So the last example is the Loft Cinema. They've transitioned quickly to streaming, where customers can rent from home the movies that were originally scheduled to play on the screens and that help the Loft generate more revenue. These films become available every Friday and without the limitations of physical screen space, as was a limitation prior. They're also offering live streaming parties, and other interactive options are being planned for the future. They're also able to show more films than usual. So those are 4 examples of the pivoting going on already. And again, that idea of going from triage to recovery to resiliency. And in terms of resiliency and the other phases prior, we have a number of programs that we're rolling out at the end of this month for supporting the planning process around retooling and relaunching your business plans to be focused on those 3 stages, and particularly emphasizing the resiliency phases that we know are going to be needed more than ever. So we have a Green Leaders program, we have a Scale Up program. All of these programs you can find at www.sazgva.com under the Southern Arizona Green Building Alliance website that we launched a few months back, and we've been retooling the programs to be not just about sustainability cost savings, but also about resiliency planning to strengthen your business model. So those are the updates that I wanted to provide, and we're happy to answer any questions for the rest of the time.
That's fantastic. Thank you both, Mike, Kimber. There are some questions, and actually some mirror some of the thoughts that I had while you were talking. One of the questions from Amy: I'm a small business owner who wants to know how to proceed safely and best ask my customers to comply without turning them off, turning them away, or in some way causing that awkwardness. So how do businesses reopen with that in mind, and some thoughts about, or some best practices?
So I can share some best practices and the discussions that I'm hearing from businesses across the country. Some of them are closer to reopening than we are here in Arizona. And that is managing flow in your business. You can use arrows on the floor to, if you're a retail store, making sure that people don't bunch each other up. Some businesses are talking about limiting the number of customers they can have in the store. We've talked to a number of retailers who are actually having bandanas made with their logo for anybody that wants to come in their business that doesn't have a mask. To ask them to put on the branded handkerchief. And I do think that some people are going to be offended, and I think it's going to be up to every store to manage that themselves. What makes them comfortable, understanding that your staff is frontline there. And I think it's a team, the best practice is to make sure it's a team discussion. Other things, I think there's a lot of, we have glass companies that are making plexiglass shields for front counters. Other companies are saying no cash. You can't use cash anymore because money is just such a bundle of germs. So there are a number of different ideas that I kind of threw out there. But again, I actually own a retail store. We're thinking at least 3 weeks more of just curbside pickup before we're going to consider it. And we're definitely going to limit the number of people. I will share from the Midwest, I heard this idea, which is pretty bold, and I'm not sure if it would work in Arizona, but they're doing by appointment only. And you actually have to pay to get an appointment. And then the money gets turned right into your purchase. The reason they're doing that is because they don't want any looky-loos, which I think is a really interesting approach. And I think that would, my personal opinion is that would be tough to fly in Arizona, but just so you know, there's people around the country having those types of conversations.
Yeah. No, you said some key things, and I think some of it around the messaging, right? And when you talk about taking care of your employees and your staff, and maybe you communicate that with some signs on the doors and some other things to prep people going in, so they know it's more about healthcare and safety of their people, and maybe not so much about the customer or the patron of the business that day. So I think those are, yeah, there's going to be questions about inventory, I'm sure, you know, staffing back up and other expenses related to operating with with social distancing or sort of a new norm. You know, if you have thoughts on any of that or on any of the marketing communications, what should a business owner be thinking about now as they consider sort of that evolution of more business coming back through the door?
Well, as you said, I think the messaging is key. I think you get out in front of it on your website. You get out in front of it on social media, as well as signage in the store, explaining what steps you're taking, how often the store is being cleaned. And like you said, making sure that, you know, a lot of times people, you know, they might come in and you offer them a handkerchief and they say, no, I'm okay. Well, it's actually not about you. It's about my staff. Right. And making sure that everybody stays safe. So I think that, you know, we're working on this COVID clean concept, almost like a certification program. And we'll be unveiling that hopefully here in the next couple of weeks so that businesses can really hear from experts in other places that have already opened. We can hear about some of the challenges, lessons learned, and utilize that to our benefit here in Arizona as we think about this.
Well, that's great.
And to add to that, Barbara, with the sustainability and resiliency planning programs I referenced, we've retooled the programs and enhanced them for all of these reasons, so that there's resources and trainings and experts to support virtually through these programs now being virtual, the planning that needs to go on for incorporating all of these components into your future operational plans.
So you mentioned the virtual trainings. Are you having any challenges with access for folks that may not have access to the technology they need? How do you respond to that?
Yeah, and that's an excellent question. We are going to get it designed, and it's going to be something that we can actually print out and mail, and we are going to make it available in English and Spanish as well. And so we run a program called Fuerza Local, which has about 30 graduates in the Tucson region there. And so we're making sure that we're helping them using remote teachings that we're going to do Facebook Live for many of them. And that's how they've been transitioning their classroom online as well, using WebEx. So we're getting them used to that type of communication, and we're also going to have printed materials that we can mail.
Okay, great. So there are a couple of questions that maybe some of you can help answer. How does the expansion of unemployment benefits negatively affect our ability to rehire folks in Tucson? So I know, Dr. Hammond, you mentioned that they upped the amount of money. It's possible that some of our service workers are doing better with the unemployment benefit than maybe the wages they had on a part-time basis or a limited basis in the restaurant, for example. What do you think is going to happen with that?
Yeah, the increase in the weekly benefit is pretty significant. It does raise the benefit wage up to something that's competitive with what people would otherwise get working. I want to keep in mind that part of the reason why the benefit was increased so much is that we didn't know back in March and earlier in the year when we would have control over the outbreak. So, part of the thinking there is to make sure that people have the option of staying home long enough for us to get control of the outbreak. And there is a trade-off there that if we're able to reopen businesses and people do want to go out, that there would be competition there, or at least a trade-off for the workers to think about in terms of returning to work. I think part of the The thing to keep in mind is that though that expansion of the that $600 per week addition expires at the end of July. So it's a short-term thing. Obviously, employment is a longer-term proposition. The value of having a job in the longer term will always outweigh the short-term benefit of claiming unemployment insurance. But it's also important for employers to keep in mind that, and I think this has come up previously, is that making sure that employees feel safe coming back to work will be key, because that will be a consideration now for employees about do they want to forego those expanded benefits and return to work.
So there's a lot to navigate here for sure. I'm watching the chat room. There's a few good ideas about webinars coming up. I know SBDC, Ellen Curtin, has mentioned a webinar tomorrow called Business Resiliency. Today is a bridge to tomorrow. So again, speaking to exactly what we've been talking about here this afternoon. It looks like Community Investment Corporation is also holding a webinar on the unemployment and the PPP program on Thursday. And so there's information in the chat room on that. They're going to have Tim Medcoff and Ellen Curtin as panelists there. So that's one thing I have learned. There's no shortage of some information out there. And while business owners have some time, I think that they do well to plug into a few of these things just to give them the best information that they can have access to right now. There's a question. The governor just announced restaurants can reopen May 11. I haven't looked at that specifically, but there is a question. Any thoughts or responses to that? I would start by saying I know we're following those announcements closely, and we have a coordinated effort led by Pima County. They're calling it Pima County or Pima Back to Business. That's convening stakeholders to talk about this reopening and to talk about how we do it safely and in phases, and a phased approach in accordance with CDC guidelines that were released a week or so ago. So, but if anyone has anything to add about, how you manage for that, feel free to jump in. Then finally, there were some questions, let's see, still related to loan programs. I just wanted to circle back about our Tucson Resiliency Loan, our direct loan program. Our applications for the funds that our mayor and council has authorized would go for those applicants that are City of Tucson businesses, but there are other programs that BDFC, Business Development Finance Corporation, is administering that has taken allocations from the Tucson Industrial Development Authority, as well as Community Investment Corporation or Growth Partners Arizona, Community Foundation of Southern Arizona. Those folks have also contributed, so I know that they're more region-wide. So I would suggest that you do reach out and talk to the lenders, ask them about their programs and those eligibility requirements. Let's look and see if I'm missing anything else. It looks like we've gotten to most of those questions. Any follow-up comments? I know that it's certainly going to be, a step every way, right? One step at a time. We're going to figure this out. And we will certainly try to keep connecting everyone to resources that will help them be successful. And I think that's what's critical. None of us have been, as we heard, the word, I've heard someone say they're tired of hearing the word unprecedented, but none of us have been in this kind of experience before. And even I think, Dr. Hammond, when you described the housing market and sort of what that looks like, then it makes me think that this period of economic crisis is really very different than what we experienced over a decade ago because of that reason, if anything. Do you find that, does that set up a different picture for what it's going to look like in the weeks or months ahead?
Yeah, absolutely. This downturn and the recovery will be nothing like what we went through in 2008, 2009 and the subsequent rebound. And what will be different is that the stay-at-home orders and the government edicts are one thing, but what's really going to drive the recovery both in the labor market and in the broader economy, is going to be how people feel about going back out and resuming their normal activities. So, you know, for employers, I think part of it, the equation will be making sure that employees feel safe going to work and interacting with customers, if that's what the deal is, or being around their coworkers in other contexts. And it'll be about making sure that customers feel safe going out to shop, you know, to eat out, to interact, to go to movies, doing all those things that we used to do before, because it's not really about the government edicts. As we've seen nationwide, the social distancing was having a huge impact before most of the government shutdown orders were issued. So it's about what people are feeling. Do they feel safe about going back about their daily activities, and how soon they can feel more confident will really drive the timing and the magnitude of the rebound.
And that just, to me, means that it really does mean that business owners can impact this with how they message and how they share that information to their customers and their employees, but really to talk about what they're doing differently, and to take care of those concerns that customers have, and continue to share that. So I think it's going to be definitely a lot about communication and marketing and the strategies involved there.
And then Barbara, I did want to let, Ross had a technical question, and we can definitely connect him to one of our pro bono CPAs to answer that question. It's a tax related question. Happy to do that.
Oh, good. And feel free to, if you want to put contact information in the chat room area, that would be a great place so that people can reach out and connect to you directly. That would be fantastic. And I was reading Ellen Curtin's comment, as for restaurants, we're also going into our slow season. I guess our summertime, right, is traditionally a little quieter because it's hotter. But I think we need to, this presents an opportunity. I think we'll also be, as you mentioned, excited at some point about helping our community recover. And so that may translate into something different, and something that might surprise us all. So I do hope that we'll see some steadfast growth as we move forward. And
finally, as Ellen mentioned too, I mentioned it before, but I really want to reiterate, if you're a solo entrepreneur that was declined in the past, go ahead and apply again, because there is money left, and we really want to get as many people through. They broadened it to include you, so don't delay.
Yes. And Mike, you'll be happy to know that I have my Roadrunner coffee mug. I should have had it ready to go, but from the I Love Where I Live shop, I was one that went through the virtual tour the opening day, and I got my Roadrunner mug, and it's inspired me ever since. And so that is a fun way, you know, instead of putting our little late night purchases on Amazon, we can stroll through our local businesses and absolutely take advantage of something fun and delivered to our door in the same way. So I do encourage everyone to take a look at those merchants who have been working hard to put up those digital formats for you to browse and enjoy.
Yeah, thank you. There's a lot to learn from each other and to be inspired by, like you said. There's a lot of good news out there too, as hard as it all is, and it is, and it will be for a while.
Yes. Fantastic. Let me look and make sure we're not missing anyone else. I see we've traded good contact information there. So again, as always, if anyone is missing anything, you're absolutely welcome to reach out directly to me. We'll wrap up now as we hit our 1 hour mark, but be sure to register. We will be together again next Monday at 3 p.m. So when you see that email invite come into your inbox, go ahead and register. We will talk more about reopening. We'll have a few more experts on that, because I know the topic is going to be prominent and prevalent on everyone's minds. And so again, our hotline, 520-837-4100. So you can call our small business hotline, and we'll still try to assist you or refer you to our very talented and experienced resource partners to assist. And then go to connecttucson.com to stay up to date and join our newsletter email update list, so that you too can be sure and be in the know on all of these activities. So again, thank you both, all of you. I have 3 of you. I got a 2-for-1 when I got local first. I shouldn't have. So that's fantastic. Kimber, Mike, George, thank you all, and have a great afternoon.